Welcome to topic 3, which deals with cell processes. How things get in and out of cells in plants and animals. In order to understand cell processes, let's first define the following term. Diffusion, which is the movement of molecules or particles from an area of crowdedness, which is high concentration, to an area of lower concentration, which is where they're not crowded. And sometimes this movement from one side of the membrane to another usually happens without any help or unfacilitated. So here's diffusion. All these crowded particles will spread out throughout the room. For example, if I take a bottle of perfume and I open it up, it will diffuse throughout the room. Here's another example, but this time with a membrane involved. So particles of dye and water over on this side, eventually the dye will spread across and it'll reach something called equilibrium. Equilibrium means there's equal particles on both sides. So for example, let's look at this. This side right now we have purple dye and we have green dye. So the purple dye is in high concentration here and it's in low concentration here. The green dye, high concentration here, low here. Eventually they'll go and they'll intermingle or mix, and to a point where they're equal amounts on both sides. Now osmosis is a special kind of diffusion that involves water through a semi-permeable membrane. A semi-permeable membrane, or sometimes called a selectively permeable membrane, is a special membrane that has holes that block certain particles. Like in this picture, the blue couldn't fit across the membrane. Some examples of semi-permeable membranes are our skin, root hairs, certain types of filters. So let's look at osmosis. These little red particles represent water, and the blue may be something bigger like sugar. So right now, the water, if we count up all the water on the right compared to the left, water's in high concentration here, and it's in low concentration here, which means over time, some of the water is going to pass through the holes in the filter and go to this side till it reaches equilibrium. So here's osmosis again. As you can see, the orange go nowhere, but pretty soon the grayish dots even out. Turgor pressure is using osmosis to fill water or plant cells stuffed full of water into its vacuole. And so that's why plants can stay upright and they're fairly stiff and rigid due to turgor pressure. Here's some examples of osmosis in living cells. So an animal cell, if it is in a salt environment, will lose water through osmosis and shrink and shrivel and get dehydrated. If it's in a solution that has lots of water, it will go in and it'll become normal. And so that's how that works. Here's some more examples. Our red blood cells are influenced by water. So they can be dehydrated, like this one, or they can be normal, which means water moves in and out, or they can be swollen, which means they're in a very high dilute solution. So here's a cell membrane, and here's how things work. We have a process called passive transport, which allows substances without any energy to leave the cell membrane. And so lots of times a particle that's in high concentration inside, like a protein, will diffuse out. Why not osmosis? Because remember, osmosis is for water. And another process that involves movement of particles is active transport. And particles might, with the help of energy, be actively transported into the cell. Let's look at this video clip on passive transport.
Are you wearing my mom's perfume? That's, Dear Tim and Moby, how do our cells take in oxygen and other stuff? From Mahmood. Cells get everything they need from their environment. The cells in your body hang out in an environment of blood, which contains oxygen, water, food, and whatever else they might need to function. How does stuff get in and out of cells? Well, cells are surrounded by protective membranes. But the membranes are selectively permeable. They let some things in and keep others out. The membranes have tiny pores in them that allow certain substances, like water and oxygen, to pass through. These substances can move through the membrane without the use of energy on the cell's part. This movement is called passive transport. The cell doesn't have to do anything to make it happen. It just sits there and lets the water, nutrients, and whatever else pass through. Now, passive transport works by diffusion. That's the natural spreading of particles through a liquid or a gas. Molecules naturally spread from high concentration areas to low concentration areas. These differences in concentration are called gradients. Substances are said to diffuse down concentration gradients. Eventually, everything gets evenly mixed and a state of equilibrium or balance is reached. If you've ever smelled flowers from across a room, you've experienced the effects of diffusion. How does diffusion relate to our cells? Okay, let's say there are more oxygen molecules outside a cell than inside. Because oxygen can pass through a cell membrane, diffusion will even out the concentration of oxygen molecules inside and outside the cell. That's how our cells get the oxygen and water they need to survive. Diffusion actually works for getting rid of substances too. As carbon dioxide builds up inside of a cell, it diffuses through the membrane and into the surrounding blood, which has a lower CO2 concentration. Healthy cells maintain a state of dynamic equilibrium. Substances are constantly diffusing across cell membranes to even out the differences. Sometimes a cell will move substances up the concentration gradient. And food particles, like glucose, are too big to get through the gaps in the cell membrane. When a cell has to use energy to move substances across its membrane, it's called active transport. But that's really a whole other subject.
And that's topic 3.